Japan claims there are no homeless people in the country. 0. The reports are clean. There's no one on the streets. On paper, the problem is solved. But that's just an illusion. Homeless people exist in Japan, they're just invisible. They're hidden from view, from the streets, in the statistics. There are no tent cities in Tokyo, and you won't even see beggars. But that's not because they don't exist. Japan has simply done everything it can to make homeless people as invisible as possible. Here's a gentle reminder to do a few things below the video. So, Saturday night in Kotobuka. A dozen drunken old men fill an illegal mountain hangout in a dimly lit alley. They bet on powerboat races and other competitions. But while the old men drink beer and watch rows of televisions, few have the money to actually place bets. People simply have nowhere else to be. In fact, they are all homeless. But Japan doesn't admit it. Kotobuka is one of 3 traditional day labor districts, also known as doyagai. People live here in dorm-like rooms and find small jobs nearby. The other 2 such districts are Sanya in Tokyo and Kamagasaki in Osaka. Despite their status as places of residence and work, they have historically also attracted the homeless and the poor. Volunteers call these areas cities, where people experiencing hardship live in a civilized society. These areas are predominantly populated by men, who suffer more health problems than anywhere else. It's also a common misconception that the day labor district has ultimately become a welfare district. And this is partly true. Kamagasaki and Kotobuka were created when people were relocated from slums there in 1911 in Osaka and in the mid-1950s in Yokohama. A typical home in Kotobuka is a tiny room, about 5 square meters, big enough to fit 3 tatami mats. This room is usually crammed with kitchen utensils, a television, a refrigerator, a mattress, clothes, shoes, and other essentials. As of 2016, a person living in such a room received approximately 146,000 yen in government assistance, the equivalent of $1,253 at the time. People split this money roughly evenly between living expenses and living expenses. But essentially, none of them have or ever had their own home, and the conditions they are forced to live in are truly deplorable. So why aren't these people called homeless? Well, the term homelessness is actually quite specific. Japan's 2000 law on special measures concerning assistance for the self-sufficiency of homeless persons defines homelessness as living in public spaces, such as streets and parks, excluding those in shelters or temporary accommodations. This narrow definition means that many homeless people are simply not counted in official statistics. Even people experiencing housing problems and living in precarious conditions are still not technically homeless. Real homelessness is measured by the number of people seen in parks and on riverbanks during the day. Nighttime homelessness is virtually non-existent. Furthermore, there are several proven ways to avoid being counted among homeless people, and the Japanese actively use them. Speaking of statistics, as of January 2025, the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare reported 2,591 homeless people nationwide. Japan's population is approximately 120 per million, so the homeless rate is truly near zero, well under 1%. In fact, Japan is considered the country with the lowest homelessness rate in the world, a title it shares with Finland. But in practice, things are, of course, quite different. The first way to avoid becoming part of the homeless statistics in Japan is to hide. In American cities like Los Angeles, New York, and San Francisco, sprawling homeless encampments serve as a reminder of the crisis. These tent cities are both a symptom of a failing system and a source of public discontent. People forced to live on the streets pitch their tents close together for safety and to create communal encampments. In some cities, such as Seattle, Washington, tent encampments are even sanctioned by local authorities. In 2017, the National Homeless Rights Center recorded a 1,342% increase in the number of such unique encampments reported in the media. In 2007, 19 camps were registered, while by mid-2017, the media reported 255 camps, and the number continues to grow. However, you'll never see such a scene in Japan. Every night, hundreds of people unpack their cardboard boxes to sleep in, and in the morning, these boxes are folded and hidden from view. During the day, Japanese homeless people try to blend in with the rest of society and avoid attracting attention. These people don't beg, don't panhandle, and don't appear dirty. If you saw them on the street, you'd never guess they'd spent the night homeless. But why is this? It's all about cultural norms. In Japan, public displays of hardship are frowned upon. Geographically, Japanese homeless people tend to cluster in city parks, along roadsides, and on riverbanks, which helps them stay out of sight. And because being homeless in Japan is shameful, it further suppresses visibility. Seeking help is seen as a personal failure, and homeless people are often marginalized to the point of being ignored by society. This problem is especially acute for men, who make up over 90% of the homeless. As a result, many of them avoid public places and seek refuge in internet cafes. Keep this in mind, I'll come back to it a bit later. Most homeless people survive on odd jobs and have no contact with their families due to the shame associated with homelessness. Public restrooms and washing facilities are common throughout Japan, so most homeless people maintain a sufficient level of cleanliness to blend in. But the main problem with invisibility and the desire to become invisible is, of course, shame. Men without obvious illnesses or injuries are often blamed and shamed for their homelessness, while Japanese officials are more likely to show compassion and provide greater support to women in the same situation. This is explained by the country's conservative views. I found a good example of shame around homelessness in a 2016 article when a reporter covering homeless people visited a soup kitchen. Everyone in need calmly lined up for food. However, none of them wanted to be photographed, although some were willing to show the media how clean the boxes they lived in were. Volunteer helpers were also reluctant to be photographed or given interviews. This is because the idea that society should help the homeless is not well established in Japan. Previously, homeless people under 65 were considered lazy, and helping them was simply wrong. Even today, Japan makes life difficult for the homeless. For example, there's an official law prohibiting begging, which can easily be considered a criminal offense, not to mention the social stigma that homelessness is one's own fault. Even urban architecture is often designed to discourage homeless people from sitting or sleeping on the streets. They are being pushed out of society as much as possible. According to surveys by the Tokyo Spring Homeless Patrol, many homeless people aren't even aware of existing social welfare programs, and those who are aware claim the application process is unnecessarily specific and detailed. Plus, remember that being homeless is incredibly shameful, so people often avoid applying. Some even report being chased away by the police or forced to hide, even when no one is nearby. There's also a perception among homeless people that the government is trying to conceal the true extent of the homelessness situation. However, hiding from statistics isn't the only way to avoid official homelessness status. Those living in capsule hotels, cheap shared housing, or housing lacking basic amenities also fall under the broader definition of homelessness. This population is difficult to quantify, but it could include tens of thousands of people across the country. While homeless shelters in Japan are not overcrowded, the media is particularly fond of comparing the situation to the United States, where the situation is quite the opposite. However, the cost of living in many parts of Japan is high, making housing unaffordable for low-income Japanese. In addition to homeless shelters, many Japanese living in poverty settle in doyagai neighborhoods, which I mentioned at the very beginning of the video. Tokyo doesn't have overnight shelters, as is common in the US and other countries. This is because such an arrangement doesn't align with Tokyo's overall goal of getting people off the streets and into shelter. Therefore, the city has about 150 long-term shelters, similar to dormitories, run by non-profit organizations indirectly supported by the government. They house approximately 4,000 people. However, these institutions have a poor reputation. Some are dilapidated, and most are overcrowded living spaces with numerous restrictions and a lack of privacy. Many people who find themselves homeless prefer the streets to these shelters and dormitories because they experience less stress on the streets. And then, there are internet cafes. And this, of course, is a truly amazing phenomenon because people actually live in internet cafes, using them as de facto homes. Often, these people lack stable employment and cannot afford permanent housing. This has led to the emergence of a separate term, internet cafe refuges. Indeed, there are so many of these homeless people that they are even considered a separate category. While these cafes initially offered only internet services, some have expanded their offerings. They now offer private space, internet access, and basic amenities like showers, making them a preferred alternative to public shelters for those seeking to escape the climate of homelessness. In Tokyo alone, an estimated 15,000 people lived in internet cafes in 2020, 5 times the official number of homeless people in Japan. Activists believe that young people affected by homelessness likely alternate between spending nights at friends' houses, internet cafes, late-night fast food restaurants, and on the streets. This makes it difficult to recognize the truly homeless in Japan. Most homeless people who spend the night in internet cafes typically have little interest in the internet. They simply use these places because they are cheaper than other options, such as hostels and capsule hotels. While chain cafes typically charge by the hour, most establishments offer discounted overnight packages. Prices vary by city, but 6 or 9-hour packages typically cost around 2,000 yen, or approximately $14. Some internet cafes not only offer free showers, but also sell underwear and other personal items. Most establishments also offer complimentary soft drinks and a variety of soups, and some even sell a wide selection of restaurant-quality food, including self-service laundry facilities. And, most importantly, there are private booths with reclining chairs that can be rented by the hour, day, or night for sleeping. The booths are separated by thin wooden partitions, and a long, narrow corridor separates one row of booths from the next. And since there are so many internet cafes, almost anyone can find a place to stay overnight. Of course, all the internet cafe patrons are homeless. Some are tired Japanese businessmen who went out for a drink after work and missed the last train home. But others truly can't afford housing. Internet cafes provide them with basic shelter and anonymity. Staff ask few questions and accept cash. Anonymity is generally one of the main advantages because no one wants their family or friends to know they're homeless. By now, you might have gotten the impression that Japan does nothing for its homeless people, only hides them and shames them. But that's not true. The decline in homelessness in the country is largely due to a number of government policies and social initiatives introduced in the late 1990s and early 2000s. For example, the Homeless Self-Sufficiency Act of 1991, which I mentioned earlier, was aimed at helping homeless people find work and achieve self-sufficiency. Self-help centers were established in Tokyo, offering temporary housing to those who could no longer live on the streets. The number of shelters was also increased. Between 1998 and 2010, their number in Tokyo actually increased significantly. There, homeless people can find not only temporary housing, but also rehabilitation services. There are also long-term shelters and social support programs. These are the shelters that function more like dormitories and offer long-term housing solutions. Yes, people aren't thrilled about them, but such shelters still exist. The government has also expanded its livelihood protection program, which provides financial assistance to the homeless, including rent and living expenses subsidies. There's another reason why Japan has fewer homeless people than anywhere else. Tom Gill, a social anthropologist, believes that Japan has fewer homeless people than the United States and other countries because the Japanese are far less likely to be addicted to various illicit substances. A 2014 study found that only about 1.6% of the Japanese population had ever tried any illicit substances, as these substances are strictly illegal. The only access to them is through gangs, which is why approximately half of substance users in Japan are gang-affiliated. However, many homeless people in Japan suffer from alcoholism. In the United States, a survey of 67,500 people found that over 50% of the American population had used some form of illegal substance in their lifetime. Substance abuse is a major cause of homelessness in the United States and can prevent people from finding housing and employment due to criminal records. Moreover, according to the Homeless Hub, 30 to 35% of all people experiencing homelessness worldwide have a mental illness. In Japan, people with mental illness are typically placed in a psychiatric institution to keep them off the streets. There are 269 psychiatric beds per 100,000 people in Japan, compared to 25 in the United States. And there's simply not enough space for everyone. But how many homeless people are there in Japan, really? Taking into account all the factors I've listed, the true number of homeless people in the country could be between 100,000 and 200,000. As you can imagine, this is significantly higher than the officially recognized number. Japan's modern homelessness crisis is generally believed to have begun after World War I, when the firebombings left nearly 9 million people homeless. However, the country's post-war economic miracle, with rapid industrial growth and innovation, led to a sharp decline in homelessness by the 1960s. And then, the economy boomed, jobs were plentiful, and the homeless population declined as people found and earned sufficient work. However, the economic bubble burst in the early 1990s, leading to the lost decade, a period of economic stagnation during which unemployment rose again, followed by homelessness. The first national survey of homelessness in Japan, conducted in 2003, identified 25,296 homeless people in Japan, of whom 23.4% were living in the 1990s. The majority were elderly men, with an average age of 56. It is precisely these people who are most affected by homelessness. Many of them fell victim to the lost decade. People used to count on lifelong employment, but then, in the 1990s, many middle-aged men found themselves unemployed. They had no social mobility to change careers, and by the time they became disabled, these men found themselves alone, without savings or family support. Most of them are former construction workers or unskilled laborers who were too old to learn new skills and were left behind by Japan's economy. However, enough time has passed since then that new homeless people have begun to appear in the country. Researchers say there are already clear signs that the pandemic has pushed more Tokyo residents to the brink of financial hardship. Charitable organizations that have operated in the city for many years are reporting increased numbers of people coming to their homeless soup kitchens. In 2022, more than 400 people lined up to receive food. Before the pandemic, the number was approximately 100. Similar data were found elsewhere. For example, free food distribution by the Moai Support Center attracted over 400 people per week, compared to the pre-COVID 60. Also telling is the sharp increase in the number of people seeking government housing assistance. The number of people approved for such assistance increased 34-fold since the onset of the pandemic. Incidentally, when the pandemic began in early 2020 and Japan declared a state of emergency, many internet cafes were forced to temporarily close. To avoid a sudden influx of people onto the streets, the Tokyo government reserved several thousand rooms in business hotels across the city to accommodate them until the state of emergency ended. This was perhaps the most visible, albeit temporary, government measure to help the homeless during the pandemic. Without it, the number of homeless people on the streets would have increased dramatically, and who knows what the consequences would have been. You deserve a like. See you soon.